By purchasing real estate in Montenegro, you can immediately obtain a residence permit, as well as gain the right to permanent residency and citizenship in the future. A similar program exists in some other European countries as well, but Montenegro has a number of differences. To begin with, real estate at Montenegro's resorts is significantly cheaper than at resorts in many other countries. Don't believe it? Well, compare the prices, for example, with Nice. The difference is about tenfold. That is, a property that costs, say, 100,000 euros in Montenegro would cost 1 million euros in Nice. Secondly, in Montenegro, you can get a residence permit for purchasing real estate of any value. For comparison, in Greece and Bulgaria, to obtain a residence permit, you need to buy property worth at least 300,000 euros. That is much more expensive than in Montenegro. And in Spain, it's 500,000 euros. Thirdly, Montenegro is almost the only country in the world, perhaps even the only one where, at present, residence permit applications are never rejected. In other words, by purchasing real estate in this country, you can be sure that you will be granted a residence permit without fail. Fourthly, you can obtain a residence permit in Montenegro, not only by purchasing residential property, but also commercial real estate. To obtain a residence permit in Montenegro, your share in the purchased property must be at least 50%. Family members can obtain a residence permit through family reunification. Family members are understood to mean the husband, wife, and minor children. This is a very important point, and I want you to understand it perfectly. Therefore, I will describe several examples of how to obtain a residence permit in the future. Example 1. Let's say a standard family of 3 arrives in Montenegro: husband, wife, and a minor child. There are the following options for obtaining a residence permit. Option 1. The husband and wife can buy real estate, with each holding an equal 50% share. Accordingly, both of them obtain a residence permit as property owners, and the child is granted a permit through family reunification. Option 2. There may be situations where the property is purchased in the name of only one spouse, for example, the husband. In this case, the husband receives the residence permit as the property owner, while the wife and minor child obtain theirs through family reunification. Example number 2. It is often the case that a family arrives with an adult child. For example, a wife, husband, and a 20-year-old son. An adult child cannot obtain a residence permit through family reunification, but can receive one as a property owner. The solution in this case is very simple. When purchasing property, register 50% in the name of one of the adult family members, for example, the husband, and the remaining 50% in the name of the adult child. In this situation, the husband and child will receive residence permits as property owners, while the wife will obtain hers through family reunification. In this video, I won't describe all the documents required when applying for a residence permit based on property ownership in Montenegro. I'll only list the documents that need to be brought from your home country. Let's begin. The property owner or owners need the following documents to obtain a residence permit: a certificate of no criminal record issued within the last 6 months with a physical stamp, not electronic, and a foreign passport valid for at least 15 months at the time of applying for the residence permit, not at the time of entering Montenegro. After all, you might end up applying a month after you arrive, who knows? For a wife or husband applying for a residence permit through family reunification, the following are required: birth certificate, marriage certificate, certificate of no criminal record, and of course, a foreign passport. For a minor child applying for a residence permit through family reunification, a birth certificate is required. If the child is already 16 years old, a certificate of no criminal record is also required. You will also need to open an account in one of the banks in Montenegro, and the required amount for the entire family, regardless of the number of people, is 3,650 euros. The expenses for obtaining a residence permit are as follows. Insurance. The cost depends on age. In most cases, it ranges from 17 to 27 euros per person. A small fee at the GAP Government Service Center. Translations of all the documents I mentioned above cost 15 euros per document. The residence permit is issued for 1 year and is renewed annually until you obtain permanent residency, that is, the right to permanent residence. If you have obtained a residence permit through real estate, you are entitled to apply for permanent residency and citizenship in the future. Many websites state that a residence permit obtained through real estate cannot be converted into permanent residency in the future. This is not true. On the contrary, it absolutely can. Why do so many people claim otherwise, and where is the truth? The issue is not that the authors of these articles are mistaken or trying to deceive anyone. It's just that you're reading outdated articles. The residence permit for real estate was introduced in Montenegro relatively recently, in 2015. And at first, it really could not be converted into permanent residency in the future. But in 2018, a new law on foreigners was adopted, the law on foreigners, which clearly states that holders of a residence permit based on real estate have the right to obtain permanent residency after 5 years of living in the country. So, as I already mentioned, in order to get permanent residency in the future, you must live in Montenegro for 5 years with a residence permit status, meaning without any interruptions. You are allowed to be absent for no more than 30 days per year during this period. If you want to be away for a longer period, it's better to obtain a residence permit based on opening a company in Montenegro, where this is allowed. We provide services for obtaining a residence permit in Montenegro, both on the basis of opening a company and on the basis of property ownership. Feel free to contact us. After obtaining permanent residency, you can be absent from Montenegro for much longer, but no more than 1 year. In other words, you could, in principle, leave at the end of the year, come back for 1 day, and then leave again. Currently, you can apply for Montenegrin citizenship after 15 years of living in the country. However, the Montenegrin government has noticed that there is a discrepancy between their timeframes for obtaining citizenship and what is stipulated in EU legislation, specifically in the European Convention on Nationality, which, fortunately for us, Montenegro has signed, ratified, and which has come into force. And they promise that they will align these timeframes with what is set out in the convention and in accordance with the obligations they have undertaken. In the near future, citizenship will only be granted after 10 years of residence in Montenegro. Just a few months ago, there was a major discussion on this issue. And since they are striving to join the EU, their legislation must be European, and they cannot simply ignore the convention they themselves signed. Moreover, at that time, no one was actually forcing them to do it. They did it on their own, so they will simply have to bring their legislation in line with what is required. It's clear that with the permanent residency or citizenship, you can work in Montenegro, but it's still a long way to permanent residency. But is it possible to work if you only have a residence permit based on property ownership? With a residence permit based on property ownership, you cannot work in Montenegro. In fact, this is the case in all other countries with similar programs. Usually, people who obtain a residence permit through property ownership are those who do not need employment. Most often, these are freelancers and remote workers, as well as people who have income from their home country or, say, from the stock market. In short, those who do not need employment or to run a business. Pateros can also be included here. If you want to work in Montenegro or run a business, it's better to obtain a residence permit on some other basis that gives you the right to work. In this case, real estate can simply be purchased for living in Montenegro. If you have bought property, it's not necessary to get a residence permit specifically based on real estate. You can choose any other basis. You can choose real estate on our website. The link is in the description. We monitor the website constantly, regularly updating it, removing properties that have already been sold, adding new ones, and changing prices. For the most part, our listings are up to date and have accurate prices. Of course, there may be isolated cases when we haven't yet learned that an owner has sold their property and haven't removed it from the listings. But there are very few such cases. There are many times fewer of them than with our competitors. Our website is probably the most up-to-date in Montenegro. All property viewings for buyers are free of charge. We do not charge buyers any fees. When a deal is finalized, the sellers pay us a commission. Let's talk about how to buy real estate in Montenegro. To begin with, of course, you need to choose a property to purchase. You select properties on our website, tell us which ones you're interested in viewing and when you'd like to see them. We coordinate with the property owners and arrange the viewings. After you have chosen and viewed the property and you tell us that you want to buy it, the purchase process begins. The transaction is formalized at the notary's office. When signing the purchase agreement, a court translator is always present to translate the contents of the contract into Russian for you. If necessary or if you wish, you can hire a lawyer to accompany the transaction. In some cases, if there are any issues with the documents or the situation is not entirely clear, we strongly recommend hiring a lawyer to oversee the transaction or choosing another property that does not have any apparent issues. We also advise our clients on which lawyers they can choose and assist with communication with them. The payment procedure depends on the agreement between the parties and is specified in the contract. You can pay for the property either in full immediately or in several installments. Almost all property owners allow deferred payments, with very rare exceptions. The change of ownership takes place after full payment has been made. To do this, you need to provide the notary with proof of payment, and the notary will initiate the change of ownership in the land registry. This process does not have a precise time limit, but based on experience, you can expect approximately the following timeframes. That is 30 to 60 days. You can only apply for a residence permit based on property ownership after receiving the new certificate of ownership, which will list your details. Another frequently asked question is how to pay for the property. There are the following options. The first option is by bank transfer. Most often people pay from their account in their home country to the seller's account. The second option is cash. You can bring money into the country by declaring it when you leave, but this is rare. Much more often, people withdraw money from ATMs. At the time this video was recorded, you can withdraw money from any bank card without a fee, provided you withdraw at least 100 euros. Payment in cash is made in the presence of a notary who records in the contract that the payment for the property in cash of a certain amount was made in his presence. The last question to address is the tax in Montenegro. The tax in Montenegro when purchasing real estate is 3%. Let me say right away that it is not customary here to significantly understate the value of the property in order to pay less tax. And reaching such an agreement will be problematic. Moreover, if the property value differs significantly from the actual value, the tax authorities may not accept it and may say that your tax cannot be lower than a certain amount. Therefore, expect to honestly pay the full amount of tax based on the real value of the property. The specified tax is paid by the property buyer. Buyers who purchase property in a new development are exempt from paying this tax, provided that the seller is a VAT payer. In other words, if you are buying in a new development from a legal entity, you do not pay the tax. But if you are buying from a private individual who cannot be a VAT payer, you still have to pay the tax, even if they are selling an apartment in a new development.